Welcome back to another episode of Gatehouse Insights. Today, I am joined by Niti, who is the head of legal at Philip Morris. Today, she's going to dive deeper into the topics of how to deal with imposter syndrome, the benefits of being vulnerable in the workplace, how to deal with disappointments and setbacks, and much, much more. Make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all. So I wanted to begin with what made you pursue a career in law and your experience in both Australia and the UK and how you've ended up where you're at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So actually, it's funny because when I was at school, I had no intention of doing law, and I kind of fell into it in large part because I'd originally decided I wanted to do languages and commerce because I loved economics at school, and then decided, my Mandarin wasn't really going very far very quickly. So I was like, maybe I won't do that anymore. And so I changed my mind. And so I was like, what can I do instead of arts? And I was like, well, I like humanities, so maybe I'll do law. And so it was kind of an accident. And then got to uni and loved law and really disliked university economics, and because it was stats more than anything else. And so, did my law degree, and at the end of that was like, okay, well, what now? And at law school, you get told the next step is you go join a big firm, and you go do that if you can, right? And so that's what I did. So I joined Ashurst, which was Blake's at the time in Melbourne, and it sort of was a bit of a reality shock the first few months of being in law firms. I don't think law school really prepares you for what legal practice is going to be like. And I just was not expecting to be, doing so much proofreading and just things that, possibly a little bit mundane on a daily basis. And then I also was not expecting the lifestyle change. And so that really hit me quite hard. And in those first few months, I was like, I don't know that I want to do this. Like, why am I here? What am I doing? And so I really questioned being at firms. And I sort of started telling myself, I don't think I'm going to do this for more than a couple of years, and then I'll go and do something else. And so that was the plan. And so I was at Ashurst for about three years, including my articles here, and including a secondment at ANZ. And I think I was on holidays just before I went to ANZ. And I was in the UK, and I was sitting with a friend in her apartment in London. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I need to do something different. I'm a little bit bored of work, and I also want to get away and, just do something else. And she was like, why don't you move to London? And so I thought, why not? Like, there's nothing holding me back from moving. And so I literally went back home and started looking for stuff. And I thought, you know what, the easiest thing to do now is to get a job in a law firm, because it's going to be far easier to do that than trying to move in-house or something from Australia. So I applied for jobs and got a job at Allen and Overy and went and joined them the following year. And it was, my time in London was amazing. Like, it was kind of work hard, play hard, and definitely extremes of both. But I actually struggled a little bit with law firm life in London. Like, I enjoyed the work, I enjoyed the substantive work, and it was incredibly challenging and interesting. But I came across a few individuals that I didn't really gel with from a leadership perspective. And so, they often say that you learn more from bad managers than you do from good. I definitely learned a lot in London, I'll say. So, I had some pretty awful experiences with managers there. And I think because I was from Australia too, they have this real attitude that you're from Australia, you're only going to be here for a few years, and therefore we're going to use you as much as we can, right? Like, in fact, I think in one appraisal, I think I was told that as an Australian, you need to work harder and prove yourself more than people who are from here. So that was really the attitude. And so again, I said to myself again, right, a couple of years, get a few years under the belt in the UK of private practice experience, and then we'll move on again. And then I was interviewing and stuff with places, and then the GFC happened. I was like, oh my God, now there are no jobs. So then
2008, the 2008 GFC.
Yeah, 2008. Yeah, exactly. And so it was lucky at the time I was sent on a secondment to Citigroup, which ended up being fantastic. And it was the thing that really, made me decide that eventually I was going to move in-house at some point. But it just wasn't to be at that point. I mean, London went through a horrible period with the GFC, and so there were literally no jobs anywhere. So then I had in the meantime met my now husband in the UK. And so we decided, okay, a few more years and then we'd move back to Australia. So I decided, okay, well, I'll stick it out until I go back to Australia then. And then we decided to move back. And my husband said to me, let's not move straight to Melbourne. Let's go to Sydney. Your firm has now opened an office in Sydney. So it'd be so awesome. You could move with them and we could be in Sydney. And really, he didn't want to live with my parents, which is kind of what we were going to have to do before we bought a house if we moved to Melbourne, right? And so he was like, it's a great stepping stone. We should just go to Sydney. And I was like, oh, I really don't know that I want to go to Sydney. I want to go back home and I want to move in house. And I was like, no, this is a fantastic idea. So anyway, I was convinced in the end that, okay, we'll take another job in private practice and move to Sydney. And so off we went to A&O in Sydney. And I quickly realized I can't do this for too much longer. Since, it's just too much now. Like, I've been wanting to be out of private practice for about 8 years by that stage. I have to get out. And so that's when I decided, no, I need to move back to Melbourne and started looking for in-house jobs. And that's how I ended up where I am now at Philip Morris.
And how long have you been at Philip Morris now?
It's been about 8.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a long time. And it's interesting, when I first came across the job at Philip Morris, I was like, no, tobacco. I'm not, I wasn't a smoker. And so I was like, oh, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. And then I saw it again. I was like, oh, maybe I'll just go for the interviews and just do some interview practice and see how it goes. But I'm not going to take it even if they offer me a job. That's what I had in my head, right? I went to the first interview and I remember coming back because we were staying with my parents at the time. And I remember coming back and going, I am so confused. I really don't want to take a job at Philip Morris if they offer me one, but that was actually a really good interview and the people were amazing and they stay there for such a long time, which to me, coming from law firms where it's so transient in some ways, seemed to be phenomenal, because it's like, if people stay, that means they're treated well, right? And so I had 3 interviews like that. And by the third one, I was like, okay, I'm so confused now. Like, I think I'm going to change my mind. But, and it was really surreal. Like, it was just a bit strange, but yeah, but in the end, it was a good decision. They have treated me well over the years, and the work is very interesting and very challenging. And I've learned a lot, including about resilience, because working in an industry like this, you have to learn, a little bit about judgment and, being strong, I guess, in the face of that.
I love how you, at the very beginning of your, I suppose, uni degree, you're like, I'm not doing law. And 16 and a half years later, you're still in it. Like, it's incredible. Like,
I know.
It's awesome. You must love it.
I do. Look, I really do enjoy the law. And it's weird. I think in private practice, I think one of the things, like, I enjoyed the work, but I always had this feeling of, am I really doing law? Because this is not really what I studied, because you end up doing so much, it's like contractual work and drafting and stuff like that, but there's not too much interpretive work, which is kind of what you do when you're at law school. And so working where I am now, I think, I've had that for the last 8 years, where a lot of it is back to what I was doing at law school in some ways. And so, and I do enjoy it. Yeah.
Now, 2020 was the year you learned who you are, and instead of, I suppose, New Year's resolutions, which most of us do, and goal setting, you decided to focus on continual personal growth for 2021. So that's your growth journey for this year. Could you share with us what actually shifted for you in 2020, which has put you on a personal growth journey this year?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year was challenging in many ways, as it has been for most people. I came back from maternity leave after my second child in March. So I literally was getting ready to go back into the office, getting my son settled at childcare. And then the weekend before I was due back at the office, my company sent out a global email saying we're all working from home from Monday. And so I started back at work at home. And I decided to also not send my son to childcare because he had no immunity system. So I was like, well, I'll keep him at home. So he was at home with me. And then a couple of weeks later, as you know, we went into our first lockdown in Melbourne. And so my daughter was also at home with me, and she was in grade 1 last year, so doing remote learning from home. And my husband's a real estate agent, so he was out and about, at least for the first lockdown. Later on, obviously, he couldn't go out either. But so he was out and about. So I was juggling 2 kids, plus returning to work, not having any idea really what had happened over the last many months, not having seen my team for those, for that period of time. And it was challenging, it was rough. And I found myself needing to find a place or an avenue for being able to share what I was feeling and going through and some of the struggles. And so I actually, in that time, turned towards LinkedIn, which I'd used a little bit before, but not with any intent, like not intentionally. Like I'd used it every so often to write something. And so I kind of used it as a really weird kind of journal, like a very public journal. But, it was kind of just, okay, this is how I'm feeling today. I'm going to put that out there in the world. And I said to someone the other day, it was kind of this indirect way of talking to my work colleagues, because I wasn't seeing them on a daily basis. So normally you're able to rant and rave about things, that have happened to you, but I couldn't, and you just can't do as much of that when you're virtual, right? Because you don't want to be wasting people's time. And so it was my way of kind of indirectly talking to people. And I started doing that. And I remember one day, and I can't remember what it was that I'd written or who it was that said this, but someone reached out to me and they said to me, that thing that you wrote today, I really needed to hear that today. I have been really struggling, and it just made me feel less alone. And that was a big turning point for me. And I went, wow, okay, there's more to me writing than just thought dumping. This is actually making an impact on people. And so, and then I had more and more of those experiences, and through that, I don't know, because I was writing so much, I was reflecting so much as well at the same time. And so I started reflecting on my day, and I would notice more things during my day. Normally you're running around, you get the kids ready in the morning, you race them to school, then you're off to work, and then you race back to pick everyone up, and then you get dinner ready, and then you get them into bed, and then it's like, oh, okay, I can enjoy my evening now for a couple of hours, in between washing up and getting everything ready for the next day. But all of a sudden with the kids at home, even though it was still, it was crazy because of remote learning and everything that I was juggling, it meant I could actually watch my daughter doing her remote learning, and I could go, okay, this is what's going on with you, and this is what you need, and this is where you need my support. And these are the things I haven't noticed, for the past however long. And so it really made me stop and just think about what she needed as well, and equally what I needed. And I realized very quickly that I needed to exercise self-care. It was just, I couldn't be operating on all cylinders unless I had put in some time for me. So, yoga became a daily part of, it became a part of my day, and exercise as well, and eating well. All these things that just help sustain me during the day. And so it kind of started through writing, but it then kind of transferred itself into just how I went about my day. And, through that, always heard about gratitude, for example, and you should do gratitude, right? It's the right thing to do. But life gets in the way of these things quite often. But last year, when my daughter was struggling, particularly later in the year, when we went through the second lockdown, or I think maybe even when she went back to school in between, and I was like, okay, we're going to start doing gratitude every day. You're going to tell me three things that you're grateful for. And do you know the amazing thing? I actually got to know more about her day at school through asking her what she was grateful for than if I'd asked her, what did you do at school today? Right? Because it's an indirect way of asking her the same question. And so there were things like that I guess just made me shift my own perspective on life and what's important. So that was a very long-winded way of sort of explaining what the year was, but that's kind of how it evolved for me over the year.
I like 2020. It was a struggle for some, but I think in many ways it was a real eye-opener for many of us. And as you've gone through that journey, it's, you've made some changes which will be for the better going forward.
100%. I think I will look back on this year or last year and think that it was definitely a life-changing year for me. It's allowed me to step into myself more than I had done before. I've become more comfortable with being vulnerable, for example, through talking about how I'm feeling from a mental health standpoint or things like that. It's enabled me to develop a broader range of connections as well, which I never thought I would do in a year of isolation and being at home. But, through engaging with people on LinkedIn, I've actually managed to make all these amazing connections, which when we talk offline and things like that, so it's not just all online, but, these are people I think I will remain connected with for quite some time to come. So yeah, it's definitely been a life-changing year for me.
Now I want you to move us on to imposter syndrome, because it is something that made you stop and think, do your thoughts actually matter, and whether other people would find your thoughts interesting. Now a lot of us have these thoughts you've had. We've had it. I've had it. I know. But how did you not let imposter syndrome get in your way? Because you've gone out and you've just done it, and you're doing an amazing job. So, but
yeah, thank you.
You dive deeper into how you dealt with imposter syndrome and how you pushed through it.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because initially when I was writing, it was kind of just, for my existing connections, right? It was like friends, family, colleagues, ex-colleagues, I wasn't thinking any broader than that. And so within that sort of safe-ish environment, I thought, well, whatever, I can share whatever, and it doesn't matter. But then when I started getting more and more people connecting, I was like, okay, now, like, the stuff that I'm writing, does it really matter to people, like you just said? And I struggled with that for a while. I was like, I'm not sure. And I would spend ages agonizing over these posts and and then you'd like wait and you'd be like, oh my God, is anyone going to react? Is anyone going to say anything? And then the minute you got like the first reaction, be like, oh, thank God, at least someone has registered that this matters, right? But interestingly, I read a book because I started doing a thought leadership course last year. I did a lot of courses and lots of things last year. So I started doing a thought leadership course, and they had this book. And in that book, one of the things they were talking about was, do your thoughts matter? And this whole idea that people feel that their thoughts don't matter. And I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been thinking. And then this book was in front of me and talking about exactly the same topic. And I was like, I've got to get out of my head. What's important is that I'm sharing my perspective, right? And so when I write, I tend to write in the first person most of the time, and I tend to write through story, because my view is that every one of us has stories, because they're what make up our lives, right? And you can create a story out of having gone for a walk and having just, had that realization of, wow, things are beautiful around me. I've got to stop to enjoy what's around me, like, nature and the sun, the warmth of the sun, the feel of the sun, all of those sort of things. They're a story in themselves, right? But we don't often recognize it as being a story. But interestingly, they're the things that resonate with people, because everyone's done that. Everyone's been for a walk and gone, I have felt like that, and stopped and gone, wow, I've got to be in this moment, And so I think it was when I started to step back from it and go, okay, it's my perspective, they're my stories, but they don't need to be earth-shattering stories about, adversity or whatever. They can just be what's happened that day, or what my daughter has said to me that day, or what my son's now doing as a baby, or whatever it is, So I started getting out of my head a little bit, and just trusting that what I was putting out there meant something to me. And that when I got those responses, not that I needed validation, but when I got those people coming back to me saying, thank you for sharing that, or that really helped me, or that was a light bulb moment for me, that was all I needed. And it could be one person saying that on one of 20 posts, right? But that one statement was sufficient, because it was like, okay, I'm making an impact on someone else. And not only am I making an impact on someone else, I'm helping myself in the process.
The thing I love about your post is they're relatable. Like, I can relate to them. Like, even though I don't have children, but I can still relate to your post. And I'm like, I can see how I can relate to it. And so, and the way you write them is really good, because it makes you, like, you put a little sentence, it's something really capturing, and then you have to read more, and then you end up reading it. So the way you write it is a story. It's amazing. So
thank you.
Yeah, keep on sharing, because I love seeing them when they pop up.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
That's fun. I was wondering whether you could speak more about vulnerability, because we often think if we show that we're vulnerable, we are weak, we are not good enough. Our colleagues, our managers, they won't respect us. But what have you found personally to be the benefits of speaking up and being vulnerable?
Yeah, so I think vulnerability can take a few different forms, and I've sort of experienced it from quite a few different angles now. I, growing up, never used to be a sharer. Like, I wouldn't tell anyone how I was feeling, or, even when I met my now husband, he was like, can you just open up and share more? I'm sick and tired of having to ask you to tell me how you're feeling, and so I just didn't, like, it just wasn't part of my DNA at the time to do that. And I think I did grow up with this idea that talking about your feelings and talking about mistakes and things like that, or not knowing the answer, was a sign of weakness. And I have to say, law firm environments didn't really help that, because if you did say you didn't know, it didn't always go down very well, right? And I think in that environment, it's full of people that don't know how to be vulnerable most of the time. But for me, the big turning point was a few years ago. Between my two kids, had some miscarriages, and the first miscarriage, I was reflecting the other day. I don't think I would have told my boss or told work if it hadn't have been for the fact that I was supposed to go on a conference a week after. And I was like, I have to tell him because I don't want to have this, baby pass whilst I'm at this conference. So I need to tell him because I need to be at home. I cannot be somewhere else right now. I'm going to need support. And so if it hadn't been for that, I probably wouldn't have told him. I probably would have said, I've, got a cold, I'm going to take some sick leave and just stay at home, and then would have gone on through the next week and months just pretending that everything was okay and that I was fine, where really I wasn't. And it took me a good, I think about 2 to 3 months to feel anywhere near normal again. And even then, not quite back to normal, but at least that I was able to go through the day not just being on autopilot, which is kind of what I did for a few months. And then I had another miscarriage the year later. And that year, I'd just been promoted into my current role. So I was now heading up a team. I had a new group of peers. And so I really felt I had to impress them, right? And I fell pregnant. And then I found out I'd miscarried. And I was supposed to go traveling that weekend. I remember going in for my appointment and the OB telling me, and it's kind of it's a weird moment when you see your OB's face and the face just changes and you just know that something's not right. And so I had the surgery and everything that day. And then 2 days later, I was off to South Korea on a work trip. So I didn't have time to grieve, nothing. I kind of told myself in my head I was okay. And because I'd been through this before, so I was okay. And I had, and I'd said to myself, I knew this was a possibility because it had happened last year. I'd almost talked myself into believing that that's what was going to happen again, right? Because I didn't want to hope too much. And so I sort of told myself I was okay and went through this whole period of a couple of months just trying to, build a team and deal with the workload and everything else whilst having this thing looming in the back of my head. And I had been working with someone on mental health awareness at work, and she was at the office one day and she said to me, out of the blue, in the middle of our conversation, Niti, I just wanted to ask you, are you okay? And I paused, like I was kind of in shock, because I was like, why did you just ask me that? And then it was like, no one's really asked me that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm not okay. I'm so not okay. And I broke down in that moment, and it was kind of floodgates of not just the miscarriages, but kind of life in general. Like I'm going to dump everything on you now in the space of the next half an hour. But it was amazing. After having talked to her, I felt so much lighter, like just unburdened. And I realized in that moment how powerful talking about these things can be. And it really shifted something dramatically in me that I'd, grown up with. This is like decades of stuff and conditioning. And it really started me on this journey of thinking, do you know what? I need to talk about these things. And after I went through these experiences, I'd sort of said to myself, I need to talk about these things within a work context because they're not things that are spoken about. And yet so many people go through these sort of experiences, but we just don't know. And it will affect how they present at work, right? So I sort of said that to myself, and I kept trying to build up the courage to talk about it at work. And in the end, I ended up writing an article about it instead and posting it on LinkedIn. And it took me a long time to press that post button. I'd written it in my head, so I was very quick to write it. I remember I was one day I was in the shower and like just talking out loud, like this story that I'd written in my head. And my daughter's like, "What are you doing, mummy? Like, who are you talking to?" I'm like, "I'm just talking to myself."
No, it's just it's not what I'm saying down.
Exactly. I was like, okay, it's written itself now, but now I have to press post. And that was a scary moment because I was like, wow, I don't know where this story is going to go, who's going to read it or see it. But it was such a relief when I did press post and just put it out there. And then some of the messages I got back and some of the stories that people shared with me, some publicly, some, through messages and stuff, were beautiful. And it was through that I kind of also realized, you know what, there's so much value in talking about our own personal struggles. And that doesn't just mean adversity. It also means, if you've made a mistake, owning up to that mistake. Because, I truly believe if you can't own up to your own mistakes and you have a team underneath you, they won't own up to theirs either because you haven't given them permission to do that. You haven't role modeled it yourself, right? So in order for people to have this sort of psychological safety, which is something we talk about a lot nowadays, I think this is part of it. You need to be authentic with people. You need to share how you're feeling. So last year was a great example of that. Like there were times during the year I said to my team, I am having an awful day. I cannot cope. I am not coping. There's too much going on. I'm going to need to take some time out or whatever it is. And, and I said the same to them too. If you are having a tough day, let me know. I don't expect you all to be on every day because that's just not reality. And I'm hoping that things have shifted as a result of last year when it comes to this space of vulnerability and talking about mental health in particular. Because I do think we've moved beyond that how are you question, which no one ever listens to the response to something a little bit more real, I hope. So that's been my journey, I guess, with vulnerability.
What have you found to be the benefits of having your team being more open and vulnerable? What have you seen there? What are the differences you've noticed in your team?
Yeah, look, I think the trust is the biggest one. Again, like psychological safety, it seems to be a little bit of a buzzword and we talk about it a lot, but building trust is something that can often be quite difficult. And I think people struggle with. And I think through them opening up and through me opening up, we've grown to trust each other. And through that, as well, there's a level of transparency. And so the hierarchy disappears to some extent. Like it's still there, like I'm still their supervisor, but you have more of a reciprocal relationship with them rather than it just being one way. And I think last year was incredibly important that I knew where people were. And I think that'll continue to be the case for some time because we've all had our unique struggles, whatever they might be, whether it's, people being sick within our extended family or, friendship groups or whatever, or whether it is people having lost their jobs, there might be people whose other halves have lost their jobs or things like that. There's a lot that's happened in the last year. And I think having that space of, them feeling that they could share those sort of things with me, I think has enabled me to also be there and be more supportive for them in those moments as well.
To move us on to leadership, because as part of your role, you also lead and manage a team. From your experience, what have been your top 3 skills you've learned over the years in managing a team?
So I'd say that trusting people is the biggest one. Like I said that before, but I think, you really have to trust people. Through some negative experiences with flexible working and perceptions that came with that, particularly after becoming a parent, I realized quite early on that I need to trust my team, And I basically said to them, I'm going to be working from, this is before COVID and everything, obviously, but I'm going to be working from home one day a week. You are more than welcome to do the same. I only ask that these couple of days we have in the office together. Any other day, you choose whatever you want to do. And I'm going to trust you to get your stuff done as and when and how you want, right? So you just do what you need to do. And I think that has paid itself back in dividends because, the gratitude and the appreciation for having that trust bestowed on them, I think it then pays itself back through discretionary effort and things like that and loyalty, right? And so I think that is a really big one for me because I think that does, as I said before, create that circle of psychological safety for the team. So that's a really big one. I think the vulnerability and authenticity piece is another one. I think, for me, I noticed that when I started stepping outside of my title as a lawyer and when I started doing more in the organization that was, I guess, marrying my passions with being a lawyer or being an employee of the company, people started to pay more attention and they started to get to know me as a person and as a leader rather than just Niti the lawyer. And so, things from flexibility to mental health to talking about recognition and things like that, they're all things that I started bringing with me to my job and really getting more and more involved in. And I remember there were a couple of people here and there who were like, that's not really your job, is it? I'm like, well, it isn't. But, on the other hand, I think these are the things that make you stand apart from other people. And I think often lawyers in particular can get in this, not a rut's not the right word, but they can sort of feel that you have a job and you need to stay within the confines of that job, right? You even see it on LinkedIn, like with people's profiles, it's very much, I am a lawyer, and I'm like, okay, but there's more to you than being a lawyer, right? Like, who are you? That's what I want to know. Like, because this is what connects people. It's not you're a lawyer. Like, it's, who are you? Like, what are the traits that you possess? What is your personality? What are the things that you love doing? All of those sort of things. So for me, that was a really big one. And I think it's kind of, it's really changed things for me at the organization. And I don't think that people necessarily even put two and two together and realize that that's what it is. But in my mind, I can see it. And I'm like, things have changed for me since I started being more than just my role. So that's a big one. And I think along with that, what else would I say? So I said trust, authenticity and vulnerability. And I think, having people's back, right? Like, I think you've got to give people enough space to do their own thing and to learn and to grow, right? So kind of like a child when they're learning to walk, right? If you mother them too much and you stop them from falling each and every time, they're not going to learn how to walk, right? Falling is part of learning to walk. And in the same way with your team, you've got to, I think, allow them that space to do what they need to do and to make those few mistakes, but you've got to allow them to do it in an environment that is safe. And that safety comes with you being their safety net, right? So you tell them, I am here for you and I will make sure that if something happens, that I have your back, because that is my responsibility. But you need to go out there and you need to try things. So don't just come to me and, and ask me all the, for the answers, right? And this is something I've learned over time. I wasn't great at this when I first started in my role because you go from being in a doing role to moving to a managing role, and the transition can be, quite stark, particularly for lawyers because we often don't manage people until we get into these senior positions. And so I've had to learn it along the way, but I think it's really helped. Once I've started doing this more and more, it has helped a lot.
Before we close, is there any, I suppose, final thought you want to leave our audience with?
I think The main thing I would say is, be yourself, right? I think, for those, whether you're working in a corporate, whether you own your own business, I think it's really just owning who you are and letting that shine through, because I think people underestimate the value of that human connection, and it is enormous. So I would say, be courageously yourself.
Niti, you're amazing. So continue what you're doing on social and sharing your stories. They're incredible. And thank you for joining me this morning.
No, thank you.
And there you have it. Another episode of Gatehouse Insights draws to an end. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this video with your friends. And if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel where you can see more.